Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for our regular podcast series. Today, we're very fortunate to have Tammy Buss join us, and Tammy will be talking everything about planning and helping business succession be successful. And it's a mouthful, but Tammy, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to go through just a brief slides, just so that everybody who's not as familiar with my business, and then also for you, Tammy, just to set the stage, and then let's turn it into a bit of a conversation.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Okay, technology, take me a moment here. Okay, there we are. They say to always start at the beginning. So that's where we're starting. So once again, thanks everybody for your attention. There's Tammy's website, and Tammy's based in London, Ontario, but works throughout the United States. And you have a lot of credentials there. So you spent a lot of time in school. So good for you. And there's our
Has nothing
disclaimer.
to do with the color of my hair or anything.
This disclaimer is important. We are not giving any financial advice, tax advice, or any type of advice. This is more of a conversation. If you want any type of advice, come and speak to us directly, please. I'm David McNichol, and I started a business called McNichol and Associates in Canada back in 2001. I'm actually an engineer by academic training from the University of Western Ontario, and now I consider myself to be more of a financial engineer. Recently, we expanded into the U.S. and have a branch of our business, separate business down there. We provide investment advice to wealthy families and institutions, and you can see the type of accounts we manage. The business is 100% owned by ourselves, so we think that takes out many and most of the conflicts that exist in this industry. Everything is held by third-party custodians, so it completely eliminates any risks that way. We've got strong administrative support and extensive experience throughout the world managing portfolios. And the one important aspect to leave you in your mind is we do operate with downside protection for all of our clients. And that's very important when you look at where we are in the markets. Tammy, maybe just do an introduction on yourself, and we'll start into a few slides and then start a discussion.
Well, thank you. So I started actually in the insurance industry back in 1985. And because you did say tell a little bit of a history, right? So I can start back then. So I started in the insurance industry, and turned out I had a couple of death claims in my first year and realized that insurance played an important role in planning. And at that point, I was dealing with younger people, so it had to be more related to, disability insurance, life insurance to protect a mortgage or kids. But as I aged and my clientele aged, we became to a point where it's, how do I transition this business? How do I look at this business that I've spent 40 years creating, and how do I transition, or do I sell it, or what do I do with this business? So all the way along, I started in the insurance industry, the investment industry, looking after families in terms of benefits and pensions, and then transitioned into helping them find their right exit out of the business. And that doesn't mean exit in terms of death. It just means, how do I take a step back, And that's really important today because baby boomers are 60 years old. The youngest are 60 years old. So this is a hot topic. It's, how do I take all this hard work that I've, put into this business and either harvest the wealth out of it or transition it to the next gen. So really, that's been my sort of evolution from insurance, investments, pensions to family business advising. So for about the last 10 years, I've been working with family businesses on how to transition their business, because I did it myself. I've sold a business back about 7 years ago, and then divided a company that I had into three about 3 years ago. So I have a lot of experience with that, and I did a lot of things wrong, which is why I'm involved in this now on a daily basis to help people avoid some of the mistakes that I made earlier on. So that's in a nutshell. There's 40 years worth of experience in a minute and a half?
Maybe just move on because you've got some really interesting information here just about the U.S. statistics and just the it is in the U.S. and the amount of money that's going to be recirculating. Maybe just take us
Hmm.
through that for a bit.
Well, the reason that this is so important nowadays in understanding succession, estate planning, transitioning is because there's about 32 million family businesses in the US alone. Now, for Canadian listeners, that's almost the population of Canada, right? It's an amazing number of businesses that are involved in families to some way, family businesses in the US. And 78% of the family businesses that have been around for a while have been around for over 30 years. So there is some really good statistics in there. The other thing is that um, about 70 to 90%, if you think about this worldwide, 70 to 90% of GDP is made up from family businesses. That's a staggering number. So family businesses play an important role in the economy worldwide, not just in Canada, but in the US. And family businesses from a you know employee standpoint, they make up like over 60% of employees in the US work for family businesses. So when you have boomers who are 60, the youngest, who are the main owners of these businesses. Yes, there's younger people who own businesses, but the bulk of the family businesses are, owned by or run by an older generation. And with the boomers aging, of course, as everybody's aging, it becomes really important. Like, how do I start to transition this? So you think about it in Canada, there's like 1.2 or 3 million businesses in Canada that are under 100 employees, and 900, almost 950,000 of them almost are family run businesses. So there's a huge impact to the economy to keep these family businesses either going or transition or making the sale, right? So not having them just disappear, but having them transition to another business. Maybe they're bought out by a competitor, or maybe sold to their employees, or transition to a family member, whether that's through a will and estate planning, or through the sale or transition while you're alive. So there's a lot at stake here, not just from the wealth from the family, but for the impact it has on the world's economy.
Okay. What one number that keeps coming up their age is age 60. And because I know I'm in that lower end of the baby boomers, but the number 60 is really important. I've realized throughout my career, I've been doing this since the 1980s, and I've always dealt with clients in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's when people turn 60, it's sort of a magic number that they really start thinking about the future and planning. And some 50-year-olds might get serious about it. Very few 40-year-olds really worry about it that much yet, although they should, especially if they're already part of a family business where their father or grandfather or grandparents, I should say, might be running things and starting to think about the next generation. How do you get into these families and really get to know them so that they already know what some of their problems are, but how do you really uncover those?
Well, the issue, and again, from my experience, is that most of the clients that I'm working with are sort of accidental entrepreneurs. They were, you know, working in an industry, maybe left that employer because basically they didn't have the same core values. But at the time, they just thought they didn't get along, or they didn't like the way they treated the employees or the clients. So they ended up leaving and starting their own business. And they ended up starting their own business because they were just good at their craft. They didn't anticipate growing this large company. So the people that I'm dealing with primarily have become accidental owners. So over the years, they just work hard, head down. They bought insurance, looked at savings for retirement. They bought insurance to cover debt. But as they get older and you get into this, now I'm 60, a lot of times they don't even start to think about it in the same way because they've got this wealth. They're like, why do I need to plan? I just divide it between my kids, or, I've got lots of money. Who cares about the tax? It's only when someone else brings us in as family business advisors to help them start that conversation and look at that conversation and to open it up with their other family members And we'll talk a little bit about how it's important to have a really good collaborative team around you. But it really comes down to someone has to take the initiative to say, you need to plan more. A lot of clients will just say, I'm just going to divide my estate into, two, by my 2 kids or my 4 kids, and not really think about the planning and the tax implications and the ability for this business to continue. So if you think about, when you like talk about statistics, I like statistics, is that 75%. So 75% of family businesses will transition over the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
75%. So think about that. In the US, there's 32 million. And in Canada, there's over 900,000. That's a lot of transition going to happen over the next, 5 to 7 years, basically. I think, 10-year statistic is a couple of years old now, but really I think it's 5 to 7 years. That's going to transition in some way, shape, or form. So what you want to do is to have a proper plan in place to make sure that transition goes smoothly. And it's very hard to have those conversations because, again, I'm tending not to deal with an entrepreneur who knows where to get the help and is like bringing in all kinds of people around to grow and has all these great ideas. A lot of family businesses were just built from hard work, right? The intention wasn't to grow this great empire. And I've got clients who have less than $1 million of revenue, and I got clients that have billions of dollars of revenue. And it doesn't matter the size of the business when it comes to succession and estate planning. Yes, sort of. But it really comes down to the family conversations, right? That's what sets the tone for what the estate planning or succession planning will look like. So you have to start right at the beginning with the families. And these numbers are staggering. So think about that again. 75% of businesses are going to transition in the next 5 to 7 years.
And
So that's
what do
going
you
to
think?
impact
What do you
succession
think?
and estate planning.
What's your best guess out of that 75%? What chunk of those would try to do it themselves? As so many people have access to so many things now, thanks to the internet. They might already have a trusted advisor,
Mhm.
but just tell me what just your best guess on how many people would try to do it themselves, and then some of the pitfalls that they might run into.
Well, a lot of them try to do it themselves. So if you think about the transition, the numbers statistically on how many businesses actually transition to the next gen, it's 30% from first to second gen. Second to third is like 12 to 13. And by third generation, it's 4%. So clearly they have not received a lot of help because I don't think family businesses, the intention is not to transition to the family. So that's from the one side. Another statistic is a lot, again, try to do it on their own because only 51% in the US of people have wills. So there's not a lot of planning done. I think the easiest way to do this, if you are first generation, is just to divide it and let the next generation deal with it. But that's not the case because when you have this wealth, there's a lot of tax planning. You want to protect, your estate. You want to leave a legacy. And these aren't things that they really think about unless you have a good team around you to help you. Because each advisor, and we can talk about collaboration. Now, when you have a good collaborative team, they'll work together to help you come up with that best plan. But if you're dealing with your lawyer, and again, you have different lawyers for different purposes, right? There's estate lawyers, there's business lawyers, there's family lawyers. They don't all have the same skill set. So when you have a lawyer working with you in one area, they're looking at protecting you from a control perspective. And your accountant, and again, different types of accountants, if you're dealing internationally or dealing just locally across states, there's a lot of different skill sets that are required by your accountant or your accounting firm. It's not just one person, but their main focus is to save tax, to
Mhm.
defer it, to save it. So when you have one lane, which is the lawyer trying to protect the control, and the other side trying to protect and maintain lower tax levels, a lot of times they'll combine, they'll butt heads, right? Because sometimes you have to give up a little bit of control to save some of the tax and vice versa. Maybe you have to do something now versus later on to preserve that legacy. So it really comes down to what do you want as legacy and to have the collaborative team around you. So that includes your wealth advisors. You need someone there to help you because it's not just about investing the money. It's about what are you trying to do with that money. You mentioned earlier about the downside protection. Maybe you're not worried about growing it at 10%. You're happy to be a couple of points above inflation and protect the asset. Or maybe you need to grow it, right? There's more to it than just invest my money. There's also the tax implications. What about trust? Do you need one? Should you have one? What about your family members getting married? Do you need to protect against, divorces? What happens on divorce, death, disability? What about future generations? So there's a couple of legacies that come into play there. It's the legacy of the business and the legacy of the family. So there's a couple of sides that come into it. And most entrepreneurs have some degree of, oh, I need to go look this up. But a lot of the accidental ones just need guidance from somewhere. And it's generally coming from one of their other advisors that recommends they start to look at this. It's really about education and communication, right? In order to develop the right plan for you.
Now, how do you, once you get in the door, so to speak, like, how do you really start to educate people and get people to open up about that? The owner probably thinks that they believe that they're going to live forever. And so that then that just causes them to think, well, I'm just going to postpone any decision making because I feel fine now. So
Mhm.
how do you, other than the obvious scare tactics, and then secondly, how do you get the rest of the family on side when you might find that there's certain parts of them that don't get along? And that's fairly common
Absolutely.
in many families. So how do you handle with those two parts of it?
Absolutely. That's my whole job. That's my
Mhm.
whole job is looking after that. So generally, I get called in by the second generation. So somebody is maybe working in the business, or maybe they don't have a business anymore. Maybe it's just a wealth they've got, it's philanthropy or whatever, but they really don't know what's happening in the future. So second gen will come to me and say, look, I don't know what's happening with the business. I've been working in the business for 20 years. Like, should I go start my own business? Like, can't get mom or dad to talk about it. So that's the first step is someone has to be referred to us. So it could be an accountant, could be a lawyer, it could be anybody that refers. When they see a family stumbling, maybe they can't get the agreement signed, a shareholder agreement, or they can't get the will signed, or they're trying to save some tax and they need to look at trusts and they can't get them to make a decision. It's probably something to do with the family and communication. So the very first thing I do then is reach out to the parents and talk to them about the fact that, I've been asked to talk to them. And we look at a discovery. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to ask everybody in the family the same type of questions. And they're around the three-circle model. And we'll talk about the three-circle model in a minute, but they are around the three-circle model, which is the business, the ownership, and the family. We're going to ask them all these questions, the same questions, depending on where they are, if they're working in the business or not working in the business. And then we're going to analyze the results of that and come back with a recommendation or recommendations on what they need to start to work on. Communication almost always comes up because it's a hard topic. Also, when you are the founder or you're the second gen, it's pretty hard for you to lead the family meetings or to say, look, and I want to talk about this. When mom or dad might go, hold on here a second, son or daughter, it's my business. I started this. It's my baby. Don't you be telling me what to do. So it's really just having these conversations about what's important to everybody and then start to work on how do you work through these. And that really comes down to, we use some communication tools to actually understand each other so that you realize that if, your sister's always asking questions drives you nuts, that's really just who they are. And how do you deal with that? How do you answer those questions before they come up? Or someone's always got these great ideas but never follows through. Okay, well, how do you work through that? So a lot of the family conflict can be addressed through communication tools and then understanding the process. Once they choose what they want to work on, maybe it's they don't understand what's happening from the estate side. They don't know what's happening from a succession standpoint from the business. Are they selling it? Are they keeping it? Should I leave? Should I go? Then they start to work through that one step at a time. And my role is to keep them going down the right path. So I'm trying to align the family. And how that comes into play with this 3-circle model is for you, people who are listening right now, for you can't see the screen, there's the Venn diagram. This Venn diagram was made back in the 70s out of Harvard University. So this is sort of the foundation to all family businesses to understand these 3 circles. One is the family circle, one is the business circle, and the ownership circle. So like a Venn diagram, they're overlapping. And within that model, there's 7 positions. So one position is a family only. So that's someone who's not involved in the business or whatever the family owns. So part of the whole enterprise, not necessarily just the business, but they're just a family member. Number 2 is a business only. So someone who's maybe working in the business or in the office of whatever, again, it is you have. So someone who's not a family member, doesn't own anything. Number 3 is you just have ownership. So again, that could be, think about it when they're investing with you. So somebody is buying part of a company. They don't, in their stock portfolio, they're not a family member and they're not working in the business, but they have some ownership stake. So ownership is someone who just has ownership stake. And then the 4th position, this is when it starts to get complicated, which is why so many businesses fail to transition or the value is not really harvested or as much as they could. So you have someone who's an owner and a family member. So this is where we're trying to get family members to understand that mom or dad who's working in the business might not have to give up the business, because that's sort of a hard thing to do when it's been your baby, that they can maintain ownership and not actually be working in the business. So we spent a lot of time going through this. The 5th position, again, if you're a family member and you're working in the business, you don't have ownership yet, right? So again, the lens that you're looking through, depending on where you sit in this model, is different. And then 6th is you're a business owner. So you own the business and you work in the business. So you're getting paid a salary for a job you do, plus you get some ownership. You have an ownership stake. And then the 7th position is 99% of the people that we deal with is they're all 3. So it's generally the founder, who is, of course, a family member, a business, and an owner. And when you're first generation, these lines are very, very blurry. But as you transition, or you talk about this as, more and more, you understand the clarity around what hat you're wearing when you're asking a question or answering a question. So just to give you an example, in my office years ago, my COO used to say to me all the time, "Are you telling me that as an owner of the business, or are you telling me that as an employee of the business? Because if you're telling me that because you're the owner of the business, we'll make those changes in the company. However, if you're asking me or telling me this as a employee in the business, no, we have processes and you need to follow them like everybody else. So what hat are you wearing when you're asking me this or telling me this?" Like, good point. Good point. So it's about clarity. And what we try to do is to open up the lines of communication to see that you have to have everybody in alignment in the family. And it takes a while. It takes a while. It doesn't happen in one meeting. But that discovery phase sort of gives them the framework and the path on what they need to do in order to make those good decisions, so they don't regret selling the business or transitioning it, or understanding who can be a successor and who cannot be a successor, because each role has its own responsibilities. And we don't really have time today to talk about the responsibilities of each role, but the family plays a huge part, from the values standpoint, because a founder is generally going to take their core values and implement them into the business, right? So as we mentioned early, sometimes when you're younger and you leave an employer and go out on your own, it's because you didn't align on values. You didn't understand what it was at the time. You just knew it wasn't a good fit, right? So a lot of that could be their vision or mission or their core values. So we spend a lot of time communicating that and understanding that, having the family understand it. And once they get that, then it moves on much smoother after that.
Okay.
I shouldn't say smoother. It's easier for them to start to make decisions so they can get that estate planning and the succession planning started and in place prior to something happening. And that's the biggest issue, is to get action.
So the word succession keeps coming up, and there's many forms or But like, what can succession look like for many of the clients that families you've helped in the past?
So succession is actually, you can insert many different words. You can say your exit strategy. It could be the succession or a transition. So it's basically, there's sort of three ways to transition your business, not necessarily you, because you can transition out of working in the business to be that owner that we talked about. But for succession, you can really transfer it or, sell it to a third party. So a competitor or somebody new just wants to buy your business. So that's one way you can do it. And again, statistically out of the US, 75% of family businesses that have sold regret something along the way 1 year later, that maybe it was the process, they shouldn't have done it, the value. So there's a regret. So that goes to show you that people need to talk about that. So they're selling it to a stranger or a competitor. You can sell it or transition it to your employees, which is ESOPs, which are becoming very popular. So having your employees buy in as owners. And then the last one is to your family members. And it doesn't necessarily have to be to all family members. It can be to some. And again, when you have that 3-circle model, once you understand the 3-circle model, you can realize that I can still be an owner and a family member and not work every day in the business. So if you got a child who's interested in something else, not in running the plumbing company, they don't have to be working in the business, but they can still be an owner. So it's understanding that so that when you do make that transition or that exit, because you're exiting potentially or slowly over time, that there's no regrets and everybody understands why. You've gone through the opportunities, you've gone through, who could be what? Have you thought about it? Do you want to be part of this? What's the legacy? Because I've got families, they ask the question about what happens with the families. I have families that want the legacy of that business to continue, but they don't actually want to be involved in it day to day. So think about some of the big families that we know, Walmarts of this world, right? Not every person who's part of the Walton family is working in a store or has a role in head office or management or the vision, right? They might sit on a board, they might sit on a council, but they don't have to be working day to day. So it's understanding that. And the first generation to the second is the hardest part, right? That's the hardest part because you have no roadmap. So my role is to talk through this with family from Gen 1 to Gen 2 and Gen 2 to Gen 3. Biggest stumbling block is really the lack of understanding of the options when you're Gen 1 to Gen 2, which is why the number for transitions is so low. However, see it, there's a slide up here.
Yeah, I thought I'd throw that up. This is an interesting one
Yeah.
in your deck. And I guess you usually, when you're presenting to a group, sort of try to make them guess,
Yes.
what dates, how far back. And I'm
Yeah.
really just that, the one on the far right, start with that, the
The
Japanese
oldest family
family.
in the world. Interestingly enough, I actually presented to a group in Asia last week, and they actually knew this inn. So this inn, the Hoshiroken Inn, started in 718. So it's 1,306 years old, and it's gone through 46 generations. That's unbelievable. Interesting side note that this transition, so to generation 47, will be the first time the leader of the inn will be a woman. For those previous years, it's always been male. Now,
What
think
is the
about
business? Sorry, you keep
it's
saying
an
the inn.
inn. It's
Really?
an inn. It's the oldest family business. It's an inn in Japan, the Hoshiroken Inn. It's an old inn. It's been around for 46 generations. 718.
Yeah.
Hard to believe, eh?
It's
Still,
amazing out
still,
of
you
all
can go
those
Google it.
generations that someone hasn't tried to sell it to some other third.
Nope. And that comes back again to that vision, right? And those values. So when it's instilled, not just from Gen 1, so again, the owner who starts a business, so that's your first baby, they're the favored child. Um, they're going to instill their own values in that business. But what you want to do is get the family values that will continue through generations. It's not just your values, but what's the family values? Get a couple of family values that everybody can adhere to and that you'd want to be there forever and ever. And that's one of the stumbling blocks, is that families don't really talk about this in advance to say, we do want this to become the longest running, in or whatever it happens to be. In Canada, most of us will recognize this one, is Molson Coors. So again, there's been a lot of amalgamations and buyouts, but there's still some family ownership. So again, family ownership doesn't have to be 100%. You still have some family ownership. And this business was started in 1786. And again, it's morphed and changed over time. And that's, again, one of the other things you think about when you're bringing in next gen, is that they have their own vision and ideas for what's happening today. And that's okay. So you can branch off into different areas. And then the US one, I had to go look this up. Actually, I had to go Google it after I'd actually look at the plantation. It's a winery. So it's the Shirley Plantation. It's started in 1613. It's still active. It's fruit. They have wine. So it's still around. You can take tours of it. So again, you look at the discipline that's been with these families. And again, there's wealth that's within those families by keeping the business, and there's wealth that is generated by selling the business. So again, that's when you come back to that whole collaborative team and having, the right family business advisor, to have the right lawyer or team of lawyers, right? Because each area will require a different specialty. Accountants, insurance people, wealth advisors, family business advisors, estate practitioners. So to have a collaborative team to work together is what helps these businesses carry on for years and years, right? For generations and generations. But if you're working in your own silo, it becomes very difficult, and you want to work together to provide the best solutions for the family and what you're trying to accomplish long term.
Well, we obviously want to be involved on the wealth management side. That's such a catch-all phrase. We're asset managers, we're portfolio managers, a part of our license. Where does that come into play? Because wealth managers aren't a commodity, unless people think that they can just index their money and live forever like that, which, in my opinion, doesn't work at these turning points in the market. That's where the indexers get killed and don't have any downside protection. But where does making sure they're with the right wealth manager come into any part of your work?
Well, it comes into that collaborative piece, that what I want to do is to make sure we understand what the family's trying to achieve, whether that be, dividing assets, whether you're selling the business or just looking at the assets that you currently have, that liquid cash that you have. And what is the purpose of that? Who's going to hold it? Is it in trust? Is it in, your own name? Like how is this set up? So by having, and again, where that money is, whether it's inside a corporation, inside a trust, or just inside personal investment accounts, really has to do with the team and looking at the lawyer and the accountant and saying, what is the best structure? Once it's determined where this money should go, then it's a matter of, what do I need this money to produce? I need to have growth. Okay, well then how can you get the best growth with the least amount of risk, right? So that's where having someone who you can rely on, who you can trust, who is part of that team, will make a difference for the family overall. So you really want to make sure that the people that you're working with work with others, because if you're going down one lane, that's when a crash can happen, basically, because you're not looking to work together. So if you have advisors right now and they're not communicating, then that's probably the sign that you need to either talk to them about collaborating with your other advisors, or you need to bring in a quarterback or find new advisors. We actually had a case where the advisor that they had happened to be a lawyer in this case, would not entertain other options other than to sell. No other options to sell the business, which was not really what the family wanted. And, so the recommendation was, I think you need to talk to other people as well, because
Why do you
now
think
you're
that
only getting
was?
one
Why do you think the
opinion.
lawyer was so stubborn about that?
Don't know. We could not figure out what was going on, but they were bent and determined that they sell the business. And that might be the ultimate outcome, is you sell the business, but you need to work together. You need to work together with your team because you've got, in the case of wealth, or, you've got assets in a company, out of a company, interests, like there's lots of different places, and they might all be invested differently. One side you might want, as you mentioned, downside protection,
Mhm.
right? But it's really about putting it all together. And that only comes with looking at estate and succession planning and will and trust planning. So to make sure everything is going to happen the way you want it to happen. And you have those communications, you have those talks with your family while you're alive, so you can explain why you've made the decisions you've made. Because think about it, there's estate litigation lawyers all over the world. They're there for a reason, right? That's not what you want
We've
your
got
legacy to be.
we've got one on our board and does a great job. And yeah, and we talk regularly. Yeah, no, one of my colleagues has sent me a note here saying that these families are typically in flux when this change is going on, and they're really coming back to having a proper manager. All the managers, all the stewards of the business, bring in a element of stability. So not only from the investment manager, but the lawyer, the accountant, all of those. And yeah, of course, the family shouldn't change every one of them.
Oh, no, no,
That would
not
create more
necessarily.
flux. Yeah, so just broaden out our horizons a little bit on how you get them to make these decisions as a group, rather than just having one maybe being the person who's run the family business make all the decisions.
Well, again, the first thing is to align the family on what they're trying to do. So, what is their vision? What do they want the legacy to be? So, my role is the quarterback. So, I sort of help them decide, tease out what they're trying to do, sort of solidify that. And then what we're doing is we're looking at each pillar to see, does this align with what you're trying to do? And maybe they don't have, maybe they need shareholder agreements. Maybe they need their will and powers of attorney updated. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to talk to the accountant. We're going to say, okay, well, is this what you want? Is this the most efficient way to do this? What about your assets? Where are they? What is the issue if we sell this company? What are the issues if you want to pull money out? So the investment side, you have to have someone who's open to, okay, well, we're not investing everything one way. We've got different silos of money for different things, and making sure that the advisor you're working with is open to talking to these other advisors and coming up with a solution that everybody agrees on. Because you're going to have give and take, whether it's the insurance, the investments, the lawyer, the accountant. You have to come together to say, here's a plan. Here's what we recommend. Here's what you want as a family, for one thing. This is the best way to do it. Maybe you're selling part of the business and having family members take over part of it. In my case, I sold to a stranger, transitioned to some employees, and transitioned some of the business to my son, and carved out some for myself. So I took a company, divided it into four. Each one of those had an impact on the legal side, the tax side, the income side, the estate side, an equalization from one son in the business, one not in the business. So you need to bring everybody together, say, how's the best way to do this?
Right.
And let the family choose the options and then help them work through that. So as a quarterback, I'm the one sort of making sure this is getting done and collaborating with these other team members. So we need to work together to make sure it's a smooth transition for the family, as well as when there's a death occurs, how is that going to transition? Like, what is the purpose of this money? So let's say there's, $20 million sitting in an account. Is that just to be divided? What is the legacy of that? What do you want to happen with that? And how do you protect those assets long term? Maybe it's for the grandchildren or the great grandchildren. What do you want it to be? And again, that comes down to investing differently,
Well,
right?
this has been great. We should probably wrap up here. We've probably gone a little bit longer than we normally would. But let me just put on a final slide so people know how to get in contact with you. And of course, hope people will reach out to us as well. But there we are, Tammy. So there's your backup slide for all your coordinates and details. Thank you very much for the time on this.
Well, thank you for having me.